Judge Engoron's staff is now very upset. They're even submitting affirmations to the Court of Appeals saying that the gag order that Engoron put upon Trump needs to remain in place or else there's going to be serious consequences. We've got two documents to go through. One is from this woman. Her name is Lisa Evans. It's an affirmation. Think of it like an affidavit, like a letter in support. She submitted it to the Court of Appeals, but there's something very curious here because she says that she is writing on behalf of the court, but also she kind of is co-counsel to Judge Engoron's lawyer. She's of counsel, and does that mean she's working for the judge? So is she writing on behalf of the judge or writing on behalf of the court? I don't know. We'll find out. We also have this letter from Letitia's employee. So Letitia James, her employee, Dennis Fan, is also submitting this letter to the Court of Appeals saying, please keep Trump gagged. And the Court of Appeals was very skeptical of this gag. They said, how can you silence his free speech in the middle of a campaign and just say that he can't criticize the court, in this case, Allison Greenfield, the judge's law clerk, who is sitting there like whispering love notes in his ear or whatever it is she's doing, but it's certainly concerning to the defense. And so let's see what's cooking here because this is an interesting one. We also see that Lisa Evans is going to share with us that there's all sorts of bad language, bad, hateful words and messages that are being shared in this case, and it's being very harmful. It's scaring a bunch of people. And we're going to read through this. Like Judge Engoron, somebody called and left him a voicemail calling him some bad names, saying that he's a little, something. And so we'll take a look at some of this very colorful language that we'll have to censor out, obviously, for the show. But she's saying that Trump's statements are causing this type of harm. Let's see if that's true. She submitted this affirmation, you can see, out of the appellate division. We're challenging the gag order, and she's submitting an affirmation in opposition. So do not stay, do not put a pause on Trump's gag. She says, all right, everybody, and I like this first sentence. She kind of just tucks this away in here. Lisa M. Evans, a lawyer, duly admitted to practice law before the courts of the state of New York, she says, I am deputy counsel in the Office of Court Administration of the state of New York. Now, I want to separate that phrase. That's great. Is she writing on behalf of the court? Because she is in the Office of Court Administration. She's the lawyer there. So is this an affirmation from the court? Because it might have some weight, right? Because she's saying, hey, every time Trump posts the truth, like our phones blow up. So she's defending the court, or she says, and now she's a lawyer. She knows what she's doing. She's tucking this in here very sneakily. And am of counsel, which means she's like a contract lawyer, to David Nocenti. Okay, so she's like his employee, but works for him or with him. David Nocenti, and David Nocenti is an attorney for Judge Engoron. Huh, that's interesting. And Judge Engoron is a justice of this court. So she is of counsel to David Nocenti. So she's working with or a partner to David Nocenti, who works for Engoron. So Engoron employs Nocenti. Nocenti pays some money as of counsel to this woman, Lisa, and she's submitting this as the deputy counsel of the Court of Administration, which is strange. So is she submitting this on behalf of her client, Judge Arthur Engoron? In which case there's a conflict there, right? That's kind of a bias, like who cares what she says, because she's writing it on behalf of Judge Engoron, who's like in trouble here. Or is she writing this on behalf of the court administration? Or both, in which case it's mostly irrelevant, right? Because it's conflicted. Who is she writing for? Anyways, so she sends this in. I'm sure the Court of Appeals will catch that. But she says, I make this affirmation in opposition to Trump's request for a stay. But in what capacity? As the judge's co-counsel or as the deputy counsel for the clerk? She skips over that. So she's requesting a stay of the enforcement. Yeah, very sneaky. Now she says, on or about, they filed this order to show cause. They wanted the 4 gag orders that Judge Engoron submitted to be stayed. He issued a gag order. We know the history. The court issued a 3rd gag order because Trump made a comment about Cohen. They say that the application for the stay of the gag order should be denied. She says, here, petitioners cannot establish that they have a clear legal right to the relief. They sought gag orders. The things that the gag orders were prohibiting violate the First Amendment. And so reasonable limitations can be put upon it. And she says here, now I want to share this with you. She says, I got the affirmation of Charles Holland annexed here too as Exhibit E. It is unquestionable that Trump's conduct says the deluge of the court's chambers, phone and law clerks, personal cell phone, personal emails, hundreds of threatening, harassing, disparaging, and anti-Semitic messages, which threaten the safety of the court staff, is the type of countervailing interest that warrants the gag. And so we'll read through that. We'll see what that exhibit says. Personal cell phone, personal emails, and all the things. Now, the First Amendment does not prohibit courts from limiting speech that threatens the safety of the court staff. They've got broad discretion to control that. And here, Judge Engoron, I guess her client, maybe, I don't know. She's co-counsel to his lawyer, so maybe. Here, Judge Engoron reasonably determined that limited gag orders were necessary for the protection of its staff. So you see why this gets sneaky here? Like, is she writing on behalf of the judge or writing on behalf of the court? Because one is not the other. While freedom of expression is giving a wide range, it must not be allowed to divert the trial from the very purpose of the court system. And so we seek a stay of the sanctions. Trump seeks a stay of the sanctions, but Trump has already paid the sanctions, so it's moot. Don't give him his money back. Based on the foregoing, we say we ask for an application of a stay of the gag orders. Now, this is the actual affirmation that came in from this other guy. So Charles Holland, he is actually employed by the New York court. He's a court officer captain for DPS. He's assigned to judicial threats assessment. And he said he's familiar with threats made to Justice Engoron. Also familiar staff via emails, telephone, and social media outlets. Also aware that personal emails and cell phones of Allison Greenfield, the principal law clerk, have also been compromised. People have doxed her. Now, I make this affirmation in opposition to Trump's request for a stay of the gag order, right? So this guy is less biased, it seems, because he actually works for the court. He's not writing on behalf of Judge Engoron. That's clear. The others was not. The DPS provides security services at courthouses. That's good. And once a judicial threat has been reported, court administration and local staff are notified that a threat exists. Then they determine whether they're credible and whether the security measures are in place to protect the family. Got that. Now, prior to the commencement of the trial, the Judicial Threats Unit, prior to the trial even started, the Judicial Threats Unit became aware of harassing and disparaging comments and threats made about and towards Judge Engoron on social media. Now, once we conducted our assessment that found the threats credible, we contacted law enforcement, FBI, and Homeland to devise security measures. On or after October 3rd, the threats increased exponentially. Now they're being directed to the judge's law clerk. Specifically, on October 3rd, Trump posted to his social media account a picture called Schumer's girlfriend. Allison Greenfield is running the case against me. How disgraceful. This case should be dismissed immediately. Now, although Trump did not directly threaten Mrs. Greenfield, obviously Miss Greenfield, the comments made in his post resulted in hundreds of threatening, harassing voicemail messages that have been transcribed in over 275 single-spaced pages, right? So a lot of reaction. And we're asking ourselves about sequencing on this, okay? Sequencing as well. And so we've got a couple different things to point out. First, of course, is timing on these things. When we look at this stuff, we're missing timing, right? So you could always say something like this. Theoretically, Trump makes a post, so we'll call that action 1. Trump makes a post, nothing happens. Trump gets sanctioned, okay, is the next step. So the judge actually sanctions him. Then the sanction, the news of the sanction, causes the alleged harm, okay? So Trump posts the story, Engoron reacts to the story, and then the story is then, there's a response to the story, there's a response to the gag, stuff like that, right? So keep an eye on the sequence when we get through this. So although Mr. Trump did not specifically threaten her, we did get a bunch of phone calls. And again, I'd like to know the timing on those phone calls and then the causation of those phone calls. Did this cause the harm here, or did this cause the harm here? Okay, did number 1 cause it, or did number 2 cause it? We need to see causation on it, and timing is one way to disambiguate that. So they say, okay, a lot of phone calls came in. Miss Greenfield's personal information, including her personal cell phone number, have been compromised, resulting in daily doxing. She's been subjected to daily harassing, disparaging comments and anti-Semitic tropes. And again, I don't condone any of this. And by the way, I cannot emphasize this enough. A lot of this stuff is illegal already. So harassing, threatening comments, like threatening a judge, threatening a judge's staff is illegal, and they will prosecute that hard. And I'm not joking about that at all. So it is not the right thing to do, and it is not a legal thing to do. If you're mad about it, you know, leave a comment on a news article or post a tweet about it. But any direct calls to people, as we're going to read, like there will be people who are being prosecuted by this. It's a giant honeypot, by the way. Like they're just prosecute a bunch of people. So I have been informed by Miss Greenfield that she's been getting 20 to 30 calls per day to her personal cell phone and approximately 30 to 50 messages per day on combined sites of social media, LinkedIn, and 2 personal email addresses. Now, Miss Greenfield also informed me since the gag order was lifted, approximately half the harassing and disparaging messages have been anti-Semitic. Now, judges who receive threats are advised not to make public statements discussing the threats and any security measures that might be in place, because doing so could compromise the security measures put in place to protect them and those around them. Now, the threats against Justice Engoron and Miss Greenfield are considered to be serious and credible, and they're not hypothetical or speculative. In order to provide this court with the seriousness of the threats being made against Engoron and the staff, below is a representative sample of the hundreds of threats, disparaging and harassing comments and anti-Semitic messages directed at the judge and his staff. Below are the transcriptions of voicemail messages left on Judge Engoron's and Chambers' telephone. Now, again, I want to point out, like, I don't condone this type of message, but is this stuff abnormal? You know, in generally speaking, like, did judges get phone calls? Did court clerks get phone calls? Like, for example, during the Johnny Depp trial, for example, right? Or during any of these other trials, like the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, or any of these other trials. And And the answer is obviously yes. Like, this is obviously something that happens all the time. So I'm not condoning it, but I'm just saying that in those cases, we don't break out our traditional norms and then silence people's free speech, right? We don't just turn around and then silence Donald Trump and gag people because there are hecklers out there who take observation of the news and then do something about it, right? We're actually very cognizant of those things. There is a separate thing happening here because it's Donald Trump. So court clerks, right? There are very, very concerning trials all in this country that happen every day. High profile cases every day. There are people that make phone calls every day. This is not new. In fact, these people regularly deal with people that are much more serious than Trump. How are they dealing with drug cartels? How are they dealing with, gang-related activities? When these people are very serious, all right, you get some phone calls, people leaving some bad, voicemails, they're probably going to be prosecuted and removed. Like, they'll literally be investigated. So that threat, that specific threat is being addressed, right? Every one of these specific threats is going to be addressed. It's not like these phone calls are just floating around there in the ether and they're like, man, there's a bunch of psychos out there. Okay, the people who reach a certain threshold, they're going to have FBI agents show up at their doors, all of them. So it already has recourse. There's already mechanisms in place for this. The difference in this case relative to the other cases is that they're gagging Trump, which they don't do in other cases. And they're gagging Trump because this is a political conversation, right? And he has free speech to engage in this. This is part of the reason why you don't prosecute people, in overtly political partisan prosecutions, which is what this is. Because then it becomes about the politicized prosecution and not about the underlying facts, which is where this is going, right? These are political cudgels. So they're, now players in the game. And again, I don't condone it, but here are some of the messages that came in. The software transcribes the voicemail's profanity. And again, I'd like to know the date and times on these. We see that there are no date and times on these. So did these come in before? Did these come in right after? Did these come in relative to Trump? Whatever. So this one says, here, Judge Engoron got a message. I'm not going to call you too many names today. I mean, it's clear you're kind of this, and you're kind of weird with your nipple photos and other things. Here's another one. Hey, Arthur, you're corrupt. Okay, some comments there. Someone else told him to resign now. Says, we're going to, stuff like this, like, we're going to get you, something like that, right? Those will be prosecuted. These will be prosecuted. Like, they are going to, track that dude down. Trust me when I say this. I am going to do something. Okay, boom, that's a crime. He's going to be prosecuted for that. Do you think being a judge changes the fact that you're a pathetic little blank? You little blank dork. You little blank blank. You little blank. God, I hope you blank. I hope they blank, right? Blank, blank, blank. All you little blanks. That's probably going to be a criminal investigation. And here's one for Allison. So some very bad language there, right? And I don't condone any of this, but it's not sufficient to gag the defendant at all. And Trump has a right to continue to talk about these people. And the fact that there are repercussions like this, they're a court. They know how to deal with this. They should be able to handle much more serious threats than this and much more serious defendants than this, okay? They're charging Trump with speech crimes and election-related obstruction crimes, but they are supposed to deal with very serious criminals who actually murder and attack people in organized fashion. And so a couple phone call like this, it looks bad, okay? I understand it looks bad to anybody who's like, you would not want to be on the receiving end of that. I get it. But this is a court system, okay? They're set up for this. They've got a ton of enforcement, and this is not justification. As bad as it might feel to a layperson, it is not justification to gag somebody's free speech rights. They can't prove Trump caused any of that. They can't prove that it was Trump's statement that caused any of it. And for Trump, to turn around and say that Trump should be above it all, and maybe he shouldn't post comments attacking his political opponents who are attacking him politically and using the strong arm of the government to do that, to say that he should not respond is insane. It's ridiculous. The free speech that Trump has is the only mechanism that he has. And he is, he has to criticize and rebut these open attacks in this courtroom, right? Engoron and this woman, Greenfield, have a history of anti-Trump bias. And so he has a duty to call it out. And the fact that they, are doing what they're doing and getting appropriately criticized for it, part of the game. Now, again, I do not condone any criminal conduct at all. It's not even worth even thinking about calling or texting a judge or responding, personally to anything. But it is not sufficient to wreck the First Amendment. They say on a daily basis, the judge and his staff are inundated with hundreds of harassing and threatening phone calls. And that's what happens when you prosecute a high-profile case. It happens every time. So here they say, we want to gag Trump so we can ensure the safety of the judge and those around him. All right. So that's from Charles Holland. And that was the document that got submitted in. And it's really, questionable on its face because even the drafting of it feels like it's emerging from a conflicted person. Lisa Evans says she works for the clerk, but also kind of works for the judge and kind of doesn't know what bucket she's in when she's writing in response. But we also see that Letitia's employee also submitted another filing saying that we definitely got to gag Trump. And here's what he says. Affirmation in opposition to a motion for a stay. This guy is saying the same thing. He says, look, I am a senior solicitor general. I work for Tishy, and we're submitting this affirmation in opposition to Trump's motion. I'm familiar with the facts of this case, and I'm going to explain my position. The Supreme Court issued 4 orders challenging Trump to protect the safety of the court staff. Trump and his lawyers, repeatedly made baseless, highly inappropriate, and personally identifying attacks on the court's principal law clerk. And Judge Engoron capitalizes these, so this is probably offensive to him. Or maybe Greenfield capitalizes those when she edits the judge's opinions. Now, despite multiple warnings from the court, those attacks continued. Because that's the only thing that you can do. They say that Trump's free speech arguments are meritless and the equities tip decisively against a stay. So don't let Trump continue to speak. As the courts have made repeatedly clear, courts can impose reasonable limits on trial participants, and that's what they did here. Trump got hit 5,000, 10,000, and then another gag order. Trump made inappropriate comments about the judge's GF, accusing her of being a partisan actor. Well, she did donate over $3,000 to Democrats. It's a lot. Moreover, there will be no irreparable harm to Trump absent a stay. There are 2 things happening: the court of law and the court of public opinion. Trump is free to engage in both of those. They can't preclude him from engaging in one so that they can limit him to the other. Now, a single justice of this court out of the Court of Appeals issued an interim stay, and the return date on that motion is coming up soon. They say the high-profile nature of this case has required extensive security preparations. There's been hundreds of harassing and threatening phone calls that they just can't handle because there are a bunch of babies in there. Gosh. From the October 2nd start of the trial, petitioner's counsel began personally targeting the principal law clerk in a highly unprofessional and inappropriate manner. Even the lawyers are doing it, okay? So it's not just Trump, it's the lawyers. That day during the break, Trump announced that the rogue judge, a Trump hater, the only one who hates him more is his associate, screaming in his ear, called her Schumer's girlfriend. She donated a ton of money to Democrats. But Trump kept making statements, and then he got sanctioned. When the parties came back after court, it's like, we already know all this stuff, guys, come on. Around the same time, the second sanctions, then Trump's lawyers began making bad statements about the judge's GF. The Supreme Court, the judge, Engoron, cautioned petitioners, stop referring to my staff. And he also gagged Trump's lawyers too. And he's having a meltdown, which we covered all at length here. He says, finally, Mr. Trump's argument about summary contempt is misplaced. The judge was not disqualified from ruling on the conduct. And so here, the court should deny Trump's motion for a stay and gag him. Signed, Tishy's employee, Dennis Fan. Multiple exhibits attached here. I think these are just the judge's orders. Oh, here are Trump's True Social posts. Schumer's girlfriend, Allison Greenfield, is running this case against me. How disgraceful. This case should be dismissed immediately. There she is, hanging out. I don't know if she donated to him or not. She made a lot of donos. Now, Judge Engoron has been overturned by the state appellate court for the 4th time, calling him his ridiculous and unconstitutional gag is a disgrace. Trump-hating clerk who is sinking his court to new levels is a disgrace. They're defending the worst and least respected attorney general in the United States. Her name is Letitia. The radical and unprecedented actions of Judge Engoron will keep businesses and jobs out of New York forever. I've done nothing wrong. I have complete disclaimer clause, and the star witness against me, Cohen, was a convicted perjurer. And so that is Trump, and of course that is Engoron. And that's the Court of Appeals. We're going to be debating whether the gag order stays in place. And of course, the Court of Appeals will have some rulings on that quite soon, actually. It's been expedited. And so we'll be here continuing to cover, my friends. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for checking out robertgovea.com. If you want to get access to these PDFs, dive into any of it a little bit further. All the PDFs are uploaded there under the reports section at robertgovea.com. So check it out, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.